I began this project in 2014 with the intention of doing a print installation. But since that time, the work has led me on a journey both in printmaking, hybrid printmaking, painting, and sculpture. These are the first 3 pieces that I did involving different printmaking techniques. I first learned to sew when I was 14 years old. It was the first hard skill I learned, and I've since transferred that skill to printmaking and really enjoy making things and see the value in creating prints that will tell my story. Here, these pieces are having a conversation with these prints on the wall. This is the copper plate etching of the pattern pieces that has been reduced. This is the dress that was silk screened and then cut and sewn. This copper etched piece is having a conversation with the piece on the wall. In this work, I'm revealing the techniques or aspects of printmaking that people may not know about, but it's a very satisfying part of printmaking to have these processes. This piece on the far wall is a quilt, and it's called Form Follows Function After Reason Over Passion. And it's an homage to a Canadian artist named Joyce Wieland, who influenced me when I was at school. This is birch bark, a very iconic material because it was used for canoes and opening up the country. And Canada is full of beautiful birch bark trees. But there's a bit of a dichotomy here in that the birch bark, this hand-sewn plastic, encases it. So there's a conversation about the environment as well here. And there's a bit of humor here too, because the quilt can be seen as functional because it's waterproof and it is a quilt, but of course it's not. It's also fully reversible, so you could turn it over. The quilt is having a conversation with these 100 prints. These are monoprints of birch bark. And this piece is called 100 Canadian Stories. And it's just referencing again Canadian history in that canoe and a conversation about all the stories that there are in Canada. Also, the birch bark paper, which I use to make the prints, is having a conversation with the actual birch bark in the quilt. And it's analogous in that birch bark makes a beautiful paper. In fact, many people who've come into the gallery have said they've written on birch bark, sent letters and notes on birch bark. These paintings were a lot of fun to do. I just let the work flow. And that was difficult to do because I think painting is a very weighted process for me. I was working on this piece, which I call Smile, and I had in my studio at that time a piece of kente cloth, which is an African fabric. And I took inspiration for it from this piece. And when I did that, and I realized how it tied in with sewing lessons, that it was all about surface and pattern and texture. It was heavily in texture of pumice, that I kind of gave myself permission to make these paintings and really celebrate fabric. So you can see that in this piece called Smile. I was very happy to paint it. And in this piece called Big Red, which has the same process. So they're non-hierarchical paintings that also can be read as landscape, flying over landscape. This piece is about living on Vancouver Island. It's called Off the Island. So it very much can be read as a map. And there also seems to be hidden drawings in these as well. So this is 2 pieces, companion pieces, and they have silk screen pattern pieces on them, and these very strong images of the cross and the X, as well as monoprint making called number 5 black and number 5 white. And this is again having a conversation about patterns and materials, and also can be read as a map or a key to something or an aerial view. I like contemporary materials, industrial materials, and these pieces sitting on the shelf are made of polyurethane. And I made these in the same way that I would treat fabric, in that the polyurethane was poured over a mold and then pulled off and cut and sewn with copper wire that's having a conversation with the copper plate that's on the sewing machine. It could be read as an organic material, but it's not. It's a very industrial material. And the patterns in them are like mechanical drawings, which are having a conversation with these pattern pieces here and the CNC plate of 18 machine alterations and 15 machine alterations. These pieces are made of printmaking paper, and printmakers end up with a lot of paper because they rip paper to create prints. I took these and reused them, so they're called remnants, and I've sewn them like this black line, and the organic quality of these materials, as well as the bamboo that I placed them in. So I cut these and placed them in so they read as a spine, the body, or almost totemic images. These come in small, medium, and large. Down the concourse, we see examples of hybrid printmaking. This is called What Comes Around, and this is a CNC machined basic matrix of the globe. And here we have etching of the thread with the hand sewing. I'm commenting, of course, on the environment here and the fragility of our world. There are those connections in the show, of course, with the birch bark piece and the juxtaposition of mechanical and organic. Here's the piece again, a different glow, but with a spool of thread. These pieces are part of the series called The Lace Makers. I'm talking about divisions of labor and the idea of what's considered in many societies women's work. Also about the body politic in these figures, which could be read as human figures that are clothed in fabric that conceal their identity. Here's the Lace Makers too, which relates also to the Spanish tradition of lace making, which is very beautiful. This is a CNC machine plate, and there's polyester print figures here, which could be lace makers. The same approach in this Lace Makers one, and finally this last piece, which has fully clothed figures. Here we have another image of sewing machines and the CNC machined print overlaid with embossing and pattern pieces. I'm talking about, of course, fabrication, but playing around with materials and approaches in both Red Thread 1, 4 points, and Toddler 4. So these Shinkole pieces are of the actual fabric or the pattern pieces of the sewing, and there's thread in these pieces as well as an organic element. This piece reads as fabric and is actually a photograph of birch bark that I've laser etched through the CNC onto this plate, and then Shinkole'd sewing machine on there and done hand coloring. These pieces are called the X Factor 1 and 2. finally, here's our sample case. This piece is a very whimsical, playful piece that relates back to the paintings. It can be described as a family. They're wearing the clothing based on photographs of the paintings that we were talking about earlier. It's a very fun piece, I think, that many people can relate to. And this piece, finally, is one of the earliest pieces I did, which has very strong links and threads to the work today, which is about the juxtaposition of materials, organic elements, and encased in these boxes. This is called The Forgotten Works.